The Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett.
Everybody's talking about consciousness. Everybody wants that eternal kiss. Yeah, everyone's saying there's more than this. Everyone wants to follow their own bliss. Talking about one love, one blood, one life in everyone. One life, give each other. We are sisters and brothers. We sing
On the Expansion Zone, we examine life and our quest to understand who and what we are and of the vastness of human potentials. We explore the making of our world from quantum physics to parapsychology, health, sociology, and philosophy, along with practical living. You are reminded of the possibilities in creating personal change. So for an hour, we'll stimulate and expand the mind. Well, welcome once again to another edition of The Expansion Zone with Sonia Barrett. I'm, of course, your host, Sonia Barrett. Well, thank you for joining me this Monday, as always. And, I just like to remind folks that our view of the current times can be so diverse, particularly when we lead with fear. So, with that said, there's a quote, I love these quotes. So there's a quote that I'd like to share with you as a reminder of our resilience. And the quote is this: I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over again in my life. And that is why I'm successful. That is why I succeed. And that is from Michael Jordan. And we can all sort of relate to things in our lives, not necessarily playing basketball, but it relates. So on another note, I also want to thank you, the listeners, the supporters, those of you who have called and have emailed me. I want to thank you for thanking me for allowing me to present the kind of information that I've been presenting over the last couple of years. So I want to thank you for your continued financial support as well. And I ask you to continue to support the show through your donations to KPFK. This helps to keep the station going so that we may continue to provide you with all of your favorite shows and to keep you informed. You may make a contribution at this time as a sustainer, so a sustaining contribution or a matching pledge right now by dialing 818-985-5735, or you may do so by visiting kpfk.org. And what's the topic for today? Well, the topic for today is really important, in my opinion, very important, and it's what's missing in the news. The catastrophic effects of the lockdown on mental health in adults, juveniles, and families. And my guest today that is going to really share with us some insights that, again, we don't really hear about is Dr. Sheila Morris, who practices clinical and forensic psychology. But before we chat with our guest, before we start that dialogue, I just want to go back to that quote just for a quick moment. And it is about getting up after we stumble. We know that, even when it's impossible. I know firsthand what it's like, several times over. And however, for some, as we will learn today, getting up isn't quite so easy. So for those of us, those of you who are able to do so, let us take full advantage of our ability to pull ourselves up and be thankful for that resilience inside of us. And so the quote, once again, I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. So let's reinterpret the idea of failure and instead turn those failures into opportunities for those that have the fortitude to do so. So that's my reminder, particularly right now. Now, I'd like to get into the bio of our guest, and a bio that really emphasizes the credibility, the credible nature of our guest in presenting us with information on the current mental health crisis during this pandemic. So Dr. Sheila Morris obtained a doctoral degree in clinical psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology, Alliant University. She practices clinical and forensic psychology and has been in private practice for 20 years. Most notably, Dr. Morris specializes in adult mental health care, serving as expert witness in juvenile courts and conducting competency and other psych legal evaluations in criminal courts throughout Los Angeles, Kern, and Inyo counties. She is published in the area of juvenile delinquency and also specializes in personality assessment and its effect on functioning. She sits on various boards, is heavily involved with psychological associations, including the American Psychological Association, where she is affiliated with multiple divisions. She has had multiple adjunct faculty appointments teaching human diversity, law and ethics, psychological assessment, and community prevention. She was also the chair of the Political Actions Committee Board of Trustees for the California Psychological Association. So, Dr. Morris, a big welcome to the Expansion Zone.
Wow, thank you so much for that introduction, Sonia. Is that me? She's talking about.
I know, it's so funny because we step into our lives, as you know, just in every day and every moment. So we're stepping into our lives. So until there's a reason to step back and look, each day you're just doing what you do.
Right, exactly. And I really liked that quote that you opened up with, the theme of getting up, pulling yourself up, that failures and mistakes are not just failures and mistakes. They teach us valuable insights into life and how to conduct ourselves and how to move forward as we're navigating through the world.
Oh, absolutely. I thought it was just perfect because we all have these numerous times. I can't really count them. He's able to, but I can't really count. But I thought it was kind of interesting though. But when you're shooting hoops, I mean, yeah, I'm sure it's a lot easier to count that. But anyway, I'd really like to just start out with just a core question. And then, of course, we're going to lead into so much more. But what would you say in terms of this mental health crisis? Is it more severe than the public realizes? Because we're very caught up, I would say, in everything else, rightfully so with this pandemic. But because it's not really mentioned as much, I mean, is there more going on in terms of people that are really struggling here that's unrealized?
Absolutely. And, it's really difficult to put the numbers in place right now. There's a lot we don't know in terms of how impactful this whole pandemic is in terms of mental health. But we do know is that we're seeing more and more people suffering with depression and anxiety. due to isolation and loneliness. And those kinds of things. We have concerns about child abuse. We have concerns about the rate of suicides. We have concerns about children and families who are struggling with the educational system or the education of the children because they're not in school. So it's really, really devastating. And as you said, it's a catastrophe. There's a lot to know. There's a lot going on in the media. We're seeing, people just really being overly stressed and overly anxious. And we know that, stress, of course, is just it's a normal reaction to a crisis. But what we're seeing now is way beyond the normal reaction to the crises, because we've not seen a crisis on this magnitude before. We've never been had a worldwide lockdown or lock in or sit in or stay in. Right. So it's bigger. It's much bigger than what's being reported in terms of the mental health fallout.
Obviously, this is more significant, I think, for the public to understand. And I want to talk about that later on, the spillover, because I think we need to understand how this ultimately spills over later on in how it impacts our society. Things that we don't think about has a great impact on the overall society. But because, again, we're not really focusing on that, people are more so focusing on staying healthy, staying safe, figuring out, how they're going to, put food on the table after this is all over. But I want to ask, is there, because you said you can't really put any numbers to it, but do you think there is any greater category, say, for example, adults or juveniles, that one is more than the other in terms of the struggles right now, in terms of the mental health struggles, or is it potentially, equal across the board? Is there any one category? And I'm asking that because of the kids. They've been completely disrupted from their normal, but so have the parents. So, what do you think?
So, yeah, when it comes to the parents of school-age children, there's a lot of anxiety and despair over, teaching the kids at home. I think I read an article that LAUSD had actually lost from their roles about 15,000 students who are not signing in online and those kinds of things. So we can only assume that those students are, kind of somewhere out there, maybe at home with parents who are stressed out, trying to maybe get them linked up to the school, or dealing with, various behavioral problems, or dealing with the fact of trying to teach the parents, trying to teach their students when they themselves, may not understand some of the curricula, or, just how to teach them. And so, to answer your question, I think parents and adults are certainly suffering, just as much as children and adolescents, who are also suffering just as much. So, when we look at the totality and everything that's going on, we know that parents are stressed over the issue of not working, if they're not working, or stressed over the issues of being confined to the home and not, being around their loved ones or their friends or other family members. There's so much stress in the home now, just because a lot of people, they just don't know how they're going to make ends meet, especially if they've lost their job, how to pay rent or mortgage, or to put food on the table. We know that if parents have their own chronic health problems, that's an issue, or if they themselves suffer from mental illness, that could be exacerbated by, being at home and having these other responsibilities. And we also know that oftentimes parents and adults can be caretakers of other, elderly parents or adults or grandparents, and that can take a toll. So, there's so many different factors. There's so many different ways to look at this. I know in my own practice, I'm seeing more people coming in with anxiety. People are fearful because of the unknown. And part of this we know is that nobody really knows how long the pandemic is going to last. They don't know if they're going to be safe. They don't want to get it. They're worried about, their own mental health and physical health, the health of their children, the health of their loved ones. Some of the people that I'm seeing, they have other chronic health problems. They're not going to the doctor. They're not going to the hospital. They're not leaving their homes, many of them. And so they're overly stressed and overly worried. And so this lockdown is creating this whole isolation effect. And we know that, when we look at history and we look at some of the research on isolation, what that, isolation can do to people and how it correlates with mental illness. And so I think that's what we're seeing. I hear from people that I know who and of course everyone is affected by this. But I hear from a lot of my own family and friends who themselves may be struggling to kind of figure out what's going on, or they know of people who are struggling with this. One of the things, though, for adults is, oftentimes when there's high stress is it could be, people who struggle with drugs and alcohol. That increases oftentimes when isolation occurs. But before I get into that, I do want to talk a little bit about this whole isolation thing, because I think that's really important, I think, for people to really understand. Isolation and social isolation it's not really a new phenomenon. It's one of those things that, in psychology, we know and we've studied. We've had lots of experiments, social experiments over the years looking at isolation and, loneliness and those kinds of things. But in this pandemic, the isolation has increased exponentially because, again, it's United States wide. It's not just one area, right? Of the
state or a city.
The city. It is worldwide. So it's huge. We don't even know. It's kind of like a natural experiment almost. But from what we do know from history is that isolation and social isolation can cause a multitude of mental health problems. And depression and anxiety is just some of those problems. But I think in this pandemic, because we don't know what's going on and people are really fearing for their lives, post-traumatic stress is one of those areas of concern that we have, that many people may be suffering from a post-traumatic stress syndrome because, they are being isolated, they are alone. This may be bringing up issues, from their own past that they have to deal with, and they may not have, the means to deal with those things by themselves. So isolation in and of itself is really, really big. We know that, back in the 50s and those kinds, the 50s through the 70s, we had some experiments going on where the CIA was kind of looking at sensory deprivation and isolation of people, and kind of what that would look like in terms of how people respond. And so using various methodologies to manipulate just kind of the whole mental state of those test subjects kind of led us to know that, when someone is isolated and they're going through any kind of loneliness, or, being alone, being, taken away from their family and friends and not having anyone to speak to.
And no touch. And
just kind of, not even hearing from loved ones or friends. That has a huge effect, not only just on the psychology of people, on the psychological processes, but also the biological processes, meaning, your central nervous system is at play here, where you get into this kind of fight or flight sense, and, maybe a heightened sense of hypervigilance or awareness, or even just deprivation and depression. So, there's a lot more to be said about that. I don't want to really get too far into that, but I just want, the people to know, your listeners to know, that this whole pandemic has really caused a lot of depression and anxiety because of the isolation.
No, I'm so delighted that you shared it in depth like that, shared that information in depth, because those are things that we really need to understand. And I just really think that a lot of the focus, yes, has been on, do I have it? Do I not have it? Let me make sure I don't get it. Do I have it? Do I not have it? Let me make sure I don't get it. And so that's generally a lot of what we've heard in the news, or at least the information delivered by the mainstream media tends to put people in that frame of mind. And so we're not really looking at these other aspects, the rippling effects, which you just mentioned, of this and the outcome later on in our society. And also, we're just talking again about not just children, but the people with disabilities like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety disorders, and other disabilities. Now, many of these folks depend on what? Consistency. They depend on these routines. And
yes.
Right, and then that gets shaken. But who's thinking about this? Till this comes up, you're going, wow. And then even in their own families, which would love to you to address, even in their own families, they're moving about in a home where some of these, the evidence then is there in their own families that somebody might be suffering the effects, based on all of this, but they might not notice because they're also so busy in their own frustration.
Well, yeah, some of the, especially some of the children who have been diagnosed with autism or attention deficit disorders, they do require routine. Oftentimes, the families try to provide some routine for those children, but mainly school. School provides a really good routine. Going to school for children, teachers that they're familiar with, subject matter that they're familiar with, or other activities that they, may have been accustomed to receiving on a daily basis through school is no longer there. And so now, because it's no longer there, families are burdened with, trying to make those routines within the home and coming up with that. But again, if the parents are overburdened, they have more difficulties in kind of keeping those routines at home. And also, some of the children may, just suffer more because routines are not in place, and because parents are overstressed and may not be paying attention they may miss, a lot of the important facts around not keeping the routine going. So yeah, it's really, really devastating. The whole shutdown and pandemic is really devastating. I mean, kids with disabilities, we know they struggle a lot in general at home and in school, in their environment, with friends, and maybe academically. Just in general, there may be problems with, those things. But now, in the face of, this isolation and shutdown and staying at home, they may struggle even more. So it's really important for families to kind of look at, signals if they're seeing anything different.
So they could be acting out as well, but then you're so frustrated that you're just irritated with the child, but the acting out could be a result based on what you're saying, as a result of the disruption in routine.
Right, exactly. And, acting out that's a huge, huge issue, especially for, teenagers, just kind of normal adolescents. They're struggling. Adolescents are struggling because, again, their routine has been disrupted. And I just had a friend of mine to tell me that in her neighborhood, they've noticed, more graffiti. And I guess, the idea is that, teenagers are out. They're not really maybe at this point staying at home, and they may be out doing, various things. Sometimes it's, hard for parents to control certain behaviors that, some teenagers may have. And so, that's a problem too. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was child abuse. The child abuse hotlines are, and child abuse reporting we know is down in this pandemic because most of the mandated reporters are teachers. And, and because kids are not in school, they're not seeing, some of the abuses that go on in homes. And so therefore, the child abuse reporting is down. But we have doctors coming out in the media and writing articles for newspapers now saying that they are seeing child abuse cases in the emergency rooms now, and anything from shaken baby syndrome to burns to head traumas and those kinds of things. And so, the fallout of this, I think, we're going to be looking at this for years to come, and there's going to be a lot of, a lot of data coming out around. Did child abuse actually go up because of this, because of the isolation and the pandemic and all of that? Did it go up? Did it go down? Did it stay the same? We really just don't know. But anecdotally, we see rates of it because children are going to the hospital. Ambulances are being called. Police are being called. Those kinds of things. So that's kind of where we're getting our information from now. But I think sociologists and psychologists and, scientists are gearing up to do a lot more research on the effects, the mental health effects, especially around child abuse and reporting and domestic violence, even suicide. Suicide certainly, over the years have kind of dropped, but and again, anecdotally, we're seeing some increases in hospitals. I think I'd heard one physician say that in their hospital, they saw more suicides, more deaths by suicide, should I say. So, I think people are really, really affected by this. I mean, we know that when there's financial problems because people aren't working, it increases the risk of having all of these problems.
Let's, I'd like to, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about that. You mentioned that, but we'll see what we pick up from that after, which is the suicide rate. But I'd like to talk about that a little bit more after the break from a different angle as well. And this is for people who may be listening who may certainly feel some of that. I've actually talked to a couple of people who were not completely in that zone, but did share their sense of that feeling. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to take a short break. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back after this brief message. I am Sonia Barrett, host of The Expansion Zone. As you may know, this current pandemic has created further challenges for platforms like KPFK to meet the day-to-day financial obligations of the station. I ask you to think about the shows that you love and think about my show, The Expansion Zone. I really enjoy bringing you thought-provoking information. You might not always agree with it, but you tune in, and I am grateful. I am asking you to once again support this show and all of your favorite shows and hosts so that we may continue to be a source of information. So please call right now and make a donation, whatever you can, or become a monthly sustainer by calling 818-985-5735, 818-985-5735. I thank you, and KPFK thanks you. And we are back. Of course, you're listening to The Expansion Zone with me, Sonia Barrett, on KPFK 90.7 FM and streaming live at kpfk.org. We are chatting with my guest, Dr. Sheila Morris, about the rippling effects of this lockdown, this isolation on mental health. And right before the break, she had mentioned suicide. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up again is I just kind of wanted to, just for a moment, just give attention to that for just a moment. For anybody out there that may have been feeling some of this, maybe they're not even necessarily in their home alone, but quietly they're so stressed and all of this is going through their minds. Wouldn't you say? They're people that are actually experiencing that, even though they're not in the home by themselves, but they're in a silent fear.
Yes, definitely. You don't have to necessarily be alone in the home to experience, more anxiety, depression, or suicidal feelings, or fear, or phobias. You can just feel like, you don't feel like talking to anyone, or watching the news constantly. So that increases fear and these feelings. But I think people for the most part, they are definitely feeling these things, and they may not have an outlet to talk about them. They may not,
not be comfortable.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. They may not have a person in the home that they feel like they can speak to about it openly. So we definitely want to make sure that if people are feeling hopeless in some way or helpless in some way, because that's normal. I mean, it's, common that you're feeling hopeless, because we just don't know. We don't know how long the pandemic's going to last, and when we're going to all open up and get back to work and kind of go back to some normalcy. And because you don't know, the sense of feeling helpless and hopeless can be common, but you want to be able to talk about that. You want to be able to share those feelings with a loved one. Reach out, pick up the phone, call a friend, call a family member, text someone. If those options aren't there,
are there outlets now that, they've always been, but what's available right now with all of this?
So, doctors' offices are open for the most part now, because many of them are essential. So they are open. Reach out to your medical doctor, reach out to a psychologist, a therapist, someone that you can speak to if you want to go that route. Some people don't want to go that route and they just feel more comfortable maybe with their clergy or, a good friend. They can certainly do that. There are community agencies and organizations that may be open, certainly for, telephone calls and, telephone intakes. I think there's a big push in LA County anyway, the services that the Department of Mental Health may be offering. So, people can certainly call them. And if it's a true emergency where someone is really feeling, unsafe, they're going to hurt themselves, they have a plan to do that, but they may not really want to do that, just pick up the phone and call 911, as a last resort. I mean, because we don't want anyone to hurt themselves or to feel like there's no help available for them. I know in my office, I am definitely working with and treating people who have these feelings. And, there's a lot of work that we're doing around stress inoculation, a lot of work we're doing around avoiding, some of the health pitfalls that could further someone to feel, helpless or not, not feeling well around drugs and alcohol and, sleeping and all of those things. So we really try to help people to learn how to do those things better, especially now that, many people are in this high stress phase.
And I just think, everything that you're talking about today, I think as a society, it's really important that we get a full picture, a bigger picture of what this all means. And so it doesn't become just so self-centered on just a personal, fear of getting it or not getting it, but to look at a bigger picture. It's not just the stores being locked up or closed, but it's the human being, what is going on with us as human beings, because we're social creatures, among other things.
Yes, exactly. I mean, again, this definitely has a, just a
far-reaching.
Oh man, it's so. Words, sometimes I don't even have words for it, because not only is it on a personal level, but when we look on a humanity level, because the whole world is locked down. The whole world is experiencing this pandemic and these fears. And so we have a whole globe of people who are really in fear. And so, yes, we're going to have, a big fallout from this moving forward. The rates of depression, I'm sure, well, not sure, but I can say probably with some certainty that we'll probably see a rise in depression, because, people just don't know what to do. And it's really affecting us on a global scale. Yeah,
it's pretty wild, but probably one of the core things that you would probably throw out, and I think you did mention it earlier, is people have to have a limit on how much they're taking in terms of media information. And it sounds like a simple fix, but it's part of what needs to happen is to create, is to have some boundaries or just decide, to take a fast, I would say, a media fast or something,
Right, exactly. One of the things that I talk about a lot, with the people that I see is, yeah, definitely take a media break. Take a break from the news. Take a break from social media. Take a break from watching or reading anything about the virus or how many people have died or how many people have been infected. Take a break from those things. Do something a little bit different. Take care of your body. And, breathing, is, although it seems really simplistic, a lot of people don't breathe properly. So, we try to help people learn how to take deep breaths so that they can, improve their oxygen intake and then reduce that kind of central nervous system surge of anxiety. And just some of those simple things. I mean, exercising, stretching, doing yoga, meditation, mindfulness, all of these things, eating, better, sleeping better, relaxation, resting. So there are a lot of things that people can do to help themselves just at home, even if they don't want to get higher care from a medical provider or a psychologist or a therapist or go outside of their home. There are things that people can do within their homes to just to kind of help them feel better. Mm-hmm.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, everything you were sharing, to me, it's like giving back to yourself some sense of control, because that was like a huge thing, feeling like you have absolutely no control. But some of the things that you've said, which seem so basic, but it does give you a sense of, okay, this is what I can do for myself. This is what I have control over doing. And so I just wanted to point that out, is just giving yourself back some power and some, a sense of control through some of these very, very simple things that Dr. Morris has mentioned.
Yes, absolutely. And the things are simple, and I'm saying them simplistically so that, people can hear them. Repetition of hearing things can really sink in. And even though, these are simple measures, they are measures that many people don't take. Or many people may not do, especially when a sense of fear and anxiety and phobias have taken over one's life to where, they don't, take a step back to say, oh man, I do need to take a breath. Maybe I do need to get away from watching the news feed over and over, or being on social media constantly and hearing, the grim stories that nothing's going to get better. So I think it's really important to just kind of put it into terms where, people can hear it in a very simplistic way. And not that the things are simple, but they can be if they're, done correctly. Or, I often encourage people to, especially now that people are not socializing as much. I know that, we're using Zoom and, a lot of other online platforms to get the message out there. Hey, get a group of family members and friends and, get on your favorite online platform and, have an open dialogue with them about, some of the things that we've talked about your feelings, about, depression, about anxiety. And I did not really get into some of the symptomatology of depression or anxiety.
Yes,
or
please do, if you can, wherever you can.
Yeah. And I think that, to keep it just kind of realistic, if for depression, if you are sensing a overwhelming sense of sadness, a sense of, lack of pleasure in things that you would normally do. You're experiencing anhedonia, meaning that you're just kind of down and, nothing feels right. Nothing feels good. That's the time that you really want to try to reach out to someone, get some help. You're in bed, maybe you can't get out of bed. You don't feel motivated to do anything. You're feeling annoyed or overly irritable. Those kinds of things. Your mood has changed in some way. That's the time that you want to really try to pull yourself up. And it goes kind of back to the quote, Sonia, that you talked about in the beginning is, pulling yourself up, getting up, having the gumption, if you will, to try to do those things. And sometimes, it's difficult to do, and some people are not even able to do that because they are suffering with a chronic depression that's been long lasting and just been exacerbated by this pandemic. So I know that that's not sometimes as easy to do, but that's certainly the time that you want to get somebody to help you with that.
It was necessary to point out some of these symptoms, these things that are happening to folks, and they might not even realize that's what it is, because you're sort of caught up once again in your experiencing, and that's just across the board. But in this particular situation, yes, it's time to recognize that. And we have a few minutes left, but one of the things that I just thought I would just throw out there is when you said to take a break from all of this, is it true that people can get addicted to watching even the grim stories, even though they're being affected, not in a great way when they get done watching it? But do we just so easily fall into routines where we'll do it even though it doesn't feel good?
Well, yes. The short answer is yes. But, addiction definitely is kind of one of those biological things. And, our perceptions of what we watch and see, and we take that in, can have a effect on, your central nervous system. And it can produce a lot of chemicals in the body, neurotransmitters and hormones and those kinds of things, cortisol, norepinephrine, all of those things kind of get adrenaline pump, gets moving. And so a lot of biological processes are going on. And one can certainly get accustomed, I'll use that word, to those things and want to watch something over and over and over again. And it just kind of pulls you in, not only from a biological perspective, as I just said, but from a psychological perspective too, to where you want to kind of be in the know. You want to, it feels somewhat controlling to some people to be in the know. They want to, it feels like they have a sense of control over themselves and what's going on, to, read or listening to the media constantly, or social media or whatever. It gives them a sense of that, control. So yeah, one can certainly, be addicted to those things, even though it, is not necessarily good for you or healthy. It again, I think from a psychological perspective, it just feeds that sense, keeping in the know.
Right. We develop these patterns, boy. But yeah, we still have about 3 minutes. But I wanted to find out from you if there's anything else that you wanted to say in really giving people some additional ups, before we end the show. And boy, I don't remember what the other thing was. But yeah, if there's anything else that you feel that we should have added.
Well, I wanted to say, to kind of help with feeling better and feeling good, is laughter, right?
Yes.
Right? How laughter.
And it's free.
And it's, yes, exactly. Just kind of, using, those things to really help you to feel better and to inoculate some of the stress that you're feeling is so helpful. And I can't overemphasize this enough, that simple things leads to solutions, and how when you're stressed and when you're anxious, sometimes you just cannot remember to do the simple things. Mm-hmm. So I'm really glad that you brought that in and reinforced that, because simplicity sometimes is key.
Absolutely.
And so please get out, take a walk, take a break, breathe, sleep, try to relax. Definitely get into some mental health therapy if you feel like you need that, or if you know a loved one or family, a friend, a neighbor. Encourage them to seek help when they need it, so that some of the symptoms can be mitigated.
Right. And then of course, not downplay people's feelings, because I think sometimes we can do that because we're not really feeling that way. We are feeling stronger, even though we are also feeling upset. But sometimes we downplay, you'll be fine, get over it, when that person is really struggling. So yes, everything you've just added. Thank you.
Right, exactly. This is certainly not to downplay anyone's feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, feelings or ideations of suicide. Definitely not to downplay the fear and the anxiety that someone feels over this, because it is a real thing and people are suffering. I mean, again, it's, a catastrophe. This whole, pandemic and the mental health fallout of it. We have a lot of people who are suffering, with traumatic stress over this, having more changes in their mood and their sleep patterns, worsening of their chronic health problems, worsening of their mental health condition if they've had pre-existing mental health problems. This is just can be a worsening of it with all of this. So there is no downplay in this at all. And this is a very serious matter, but there is help available.
That's the beauty. That's mm-hmm. The beauty. All right. Well, we have come to that moment in our show, and I believe your website is morrisclinicinc.com.
Yes.
Okay. And all of this information will also be on the expansionzone.com website, underneath Dr. Morris's profile and replay in the archive. And I believe we will probably list some of these tools that were mentioned here today in terms of outlets to contact. So I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really loved all that you shared today.
Well, thank you, Sonia. I really, really am so happy that you're bringing this important information out to your listeners.
Absolutely. And yes, Dr. Sheila Morris is a really, 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 really good friend of mine.
Yes.
I have to throw that in towards the end. She's so awesome. I love her. She's just awesome.
Thank you, Sonia. I love you too. Yes, it's been a long time coming, right?
I know. Yes. Thank you. And of course, thanks to the listening audience. I am thrilled that you tuned in today. Thanks to our engineer, D'Angelo Jones. Please, as always, visit theexpansionzone.com. Check out the archive, subscribe so that I can update you on guests that are coming and once they've been on the show, just all kinds of things, articles, all sorts of things are on the website. And to know more about me, do visit therealsoniabarrett.com. And of course, as always, I like to remind you to live life to its fullest and question everything. Until next time, see you then.